Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mugdha Lele, and on behalf of the TechX team at Venture Center, and I'm happy to host the third wave of our Only One Team Awareness Talk series on innovation management. Today is the 12th talk in this wave, where today's topic is writing a DPR for taking a loan from a bank. We have a very eminent speaker today who will speak to us on this topic, Mr. Shyam Mahale. Let me briefly introduce him before we begin. Mr. Mahale has over 17 years of experience as an entrepreneur and founder director of Aries Fincap Services Private Limited, where he leads advisory services in two key verticals, and which are management and project advisory. He specializes in management advisory, counseling MSME promoters to define corporate goals, set priorities, and maintain strategic focus. And he brings extensive project advisory expertise, guiding clients through the entire project lifecycle, including greenfield, brownfield, and mergers and acquisition initiatives. With over 30 years of experience in the banking and finance sector, where he has been the ex-VP at SICOM, he has honed deep skills in credit and risk assessment, project appraisal, treasury management, and others. Additionally, he has 31 years of broad spectrum experience in both public and private sector which complements his role as a member of the board of directors for 5 Indian companies, including 3 as an independent director. This session by Mr. Mahale will empower you with strategies needed to craft persuasive and bank-ready DPR proposals. Let us give him a warm welcome, and we will hand over the session to Mr. Mahale. Welcome, Mr. Mahale.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mugdha, for your kind words. I'm really flattered by this introduction. I must reciprocate and say that I heard a lot about the work being done by Venture Center. And the little time that you've been around, I believe you have emerged as one of the leading incubation centers under the Ministry of Science and Technology. I'm sure you'll continue to do this good work. My little contribution to this effort of yours by way of this lecture today. I'll run you through a small presentation on primarily how to write DPR for a bank loan. I'll also run you through two cases of financial models, which I hope will give you some insight into what the whole subject is about.
Mr. Mahale, your voice is a little weak. Can you try to improve it a little bit?
Let me check what.
Can you just say testing 1, 2, 3? I'll just see.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it's quite good, Mugdha. I can hear clearly.
Yes.
Let's go ahead. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Continue.
I need to be a little louder, possibly. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you able to share the screen, Mr. Mahale?
I did.
Oh, we are not able to see it yet.
Okay.
Maybe you can unshare and share again.
Okay.
Use the share button at the bottom to choose the screen. Yeah, something's coming up. Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah, can go full screen.
Full screen, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Great.
Now it's.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Welcome to you all to this small 1 hour of presentation from me. I basically am supposed to be talking about how to write a detailed project report or a project loan from a bank. Before you get into that, a lot of people know DPR by They call them project study, project report, feasibility report, viability study, bankable report, and a whole lot of things. Essentially, what it contains is a document which enables the investor or a lender or even the promoter himself to take a good assessment of what the project is, what the project concept is, how will it stand scrutiny for technical feasibility and financial viability. Primary content of DPR is you describe a project concept. You also tell the world about who the promoters are and what the management is. Then you briefly get into what the product is, what the market looks like, the capacity that you're choosing to make the project. Once the project is chosen, you come to the project scheme, describe in detail, go to the project cost, the means of finance, the financial model in terms of financial projection and analysis. What does it do? It eventually has to prove that the promoters are worthy, it's a good management, the product is good, the scheme is technically feasible and financially viable, and it establishes the eligibility and basis for funding of the project scheme. It helps it just not for bankers alone. It also helps the promoters to get absolute clarity on what their project scheme should be, how will the others look at it, and how he should be looking at from the purpose of raising funds and returning those funds. And it also helps lenders to make funding decisions by assessing the project feasibility and viability in the hands of the specific set of promoters. In this presentation, we are looking at, we'll typically look at the DPR for setting up a new project, and which will involve manufacturer. It's not we're not covering service entities. We're looking at any manufacturing projects only, and a product at a greenfield site by a first generation entrepreneur. We are not looking at existing entities taking up expansion or things like this. Typical content, what would it have? First of all, you give a project summary. Then who is the proponent of the project? The applicant. I'll look at each of these separately in detail. I'll briefly look at what the typical content should be. You will also look at what the industry is, what is the product, what is the type of the industry, type of the product, what are the technologies involved, what are the technical arrangements he has, what is market condition. Depending upon the market, you zero in on the basic capacities of the project. You also look at, once you have chosen the project capacity, you have chosen the project, you also have to look at a location. Once you come to a location, each of these will have their own intricacies in terms of which I'll touch upon in slightly greater detail as we go along. You come to the project scheme. The project scheme involves three aspects. One is the capital cost, which is what the promoters are looking for funding. The project scheme will also involve the product manufacturing process, which will involve the technology, the manufacturing process will involve inputs, the tools, and the outputs. each of these manufacturing media will convert into items of capital cost. On the operation side, the inputs will be raw materials, the packing materials, the consumables, the utilities, manpower, and so on. All these eventually translate into a project cost. The project scheme, once finalized, translates into a capital cost, and the working capital margin that's required to be brought in to make the project work. So it's not enough for you to arrange for the capital cost funding. You will also need to make the project operational. For that, some money will be coming from the bank. Balance money will have to be calculated, will have to be included as part of the project cost. I need to fund the whole thing through a set of alternatives comprising of money from the promoters and external sources, which is basically the means of financing. Once you have financial closure, you look at the implementation schedule, starting with financial closure as a zero date, and take it through all stages of implementation, including the project plan, the approvals, the acquisition of assets, putting those assets on the site, making them operational, having trial runs, and then coming to a stage where you're ready to say that today I can start commercial production. So implementation schedule primarily runs from the zero date, that's the financial closure, going right up to the commercial production stage. Once you have the, let's say you have the products, you must also have the marketing arrangements. For end of the day, whatever is produced needs to be sold. You have to make money, make surplus, and pay everyone back. For doing all this, while doing all this, you also need to look at the statutory licenses, approvals. You are operating in a society which is reasonably regulated for various reasons. You can't do anything that you want without seeking approvals from the powers that be. There's a host of approvals. I'll touch upon only a few. You eventually need to cover some critical ones and make sure that you have the approvals at the right stage, and the project implementation does not get held up for want of any approvals or non-compliance with law. End of the day, you will still need to project your the project will run over a period of time between project life, but funding will have to be returned significantly before that. So you need to project your performance over the life of the project, at least till the loan component gets repaid. For the investors, of course, he'll have his own assessment of what his returns are going to be. But for a lender, the projections of performance will have to be at least for the tenure of the loan. If the tenure of the loan is, let's say, 5 years, you have to at least project your performance for 5 years. If it is required to extend the period up to, say, about 7 years, you have to be about 7 years. Most project loans get given between 5 to 10 years, depending upon the nature of the project, the kind of money that you can generate, and the bank's patience with you in terms of waiting for their money to be returned. All these performance parameters are captured in a set of statements in the form of profitability statements, in the form of cash flows, and in the form of balance sheets. All these three statements are analyzed through ratios and comparisons. And end of the day, if all these emerging ratios and analysis shows that the project is viable, then you get the funding. This is very broadly the typical content of what the typical DPR should the applicant and promoters. This is one extremely crucial element of a project. Most banks have credit rating models for evaluating the loan proposals. And the promoters carry a significant weight in the assessment. Promoters are the single largest weight and score in any credit rating model. The applicant is essentially the fellow who is applying for the loan. It can be a company, it can be a LLP, it can be a proprietorship, it can be partnership. Whatever is convenient for the promoters to put forward. The choice of entities entirely with the applicant. Some entities don't look very kindly on proprietorships or partnerships. They prefer the entity to have artificial person form, which is either an LLC or a limited company. The second most important criteria there is the past performance of of that entity or the main promoters. If they have had any previous experience of setting up projects, operating in that field, and having proved their mettle at successfully delivering on those projects or performance of whatever task they have taken up, it goes a long way in establishing their credibility. When I say promoters, next set of course is the promoters. Promoters I differentiate them from the applicant entity. They are essentially the shareholders of the ones who have promoted the applicant entity. So the applicant entity and the promoters, from the bank's perspective, are the most important critical aspect of project and eligibility to be looked into to as much detail as possible. They'll look at the qualification, the experience. They'll also look at entrepreneurial experience. If somebody is somebody is getting into a project for the first time, setting up an entity for the first time. Let's say, he's been a working professional and getting into entrepreneurship. The bankers will want to look at that with a lot of care, primarily to establish his entrepreneurial capability. Working in an entity where somebody else is carrying the risk and being an entrepreneur where you bear the entire risk are two different situations. And the lender would especially want to assess the entrepreneurial capability of the promoter in terms of past entrepreneurial experience. They'll also want to look at family background in terms of what they bring to the table. Fellows with reasonable experience of setting up industries, running projects, people who have money are considered to be better prospects at being customers of banks. First timers, without any offense to startups, first timers don't rank very high in commercial bankers' list of priorities for lending. They'll also want to look at the associate concerns of the promoters and the family. Basically, to check whether they've had any unpleasant experience in the past. So one looks at the track record of the group of promoters, their families, and their associates, and things like this. These days, CIBIL scores are available practically for everyone, whether you know it or not. Everybody has a everybody's creditworthiness being assessed um, continuously by a mechanism which RBI has created under an organization called CIBIL. All banks report the borrowings, credit card usage, uh, the in-time payments promptly to the RBI and CIBIL, practically every month, some every quarter. And based on their usage, timely payments, some scores are evolved depending upon size of the borrowing, timeliness of payment, in time, post time, small delays, short delays, long delays, no settles, no payments, small credit card dues. All those add up to a civil score, which a lot of people, um, for a lot of people, it comes as a surprise. They find that civil continues to track their some credit card dues, which where the account was closed 10 years ago, and the bank is continuing to show that as overdue. So if you are looking at setting up a project and you are one of the promoters, or if your associate concerns are involved, please ensure that your CIBIL scores are set right and brought to a level where things are acceptable. If there are any overdues or any long drawn disputes, they need to be settled and brought back to a stage where the credit rating goes to an acceptable level. There is another list of called the RBI caution list. The RBI caution list is another not so known clandestine list, which only the bankers have access to, where some past export due ECGC guarantees not fulfilled, paid by the bank, but not cleared by you. You get put into there are two lists actually. In that caution list, there are two parts. One is called the defaulters list, and second is the special approval list, SAL, where the bank says that, where the RBI says that the banker has to make sure that the permission of RBI or the lending bank has to be obtained before the lending bank gives money to this entity or the promoters. This is being rampantly used these days as a tool for recovery. A lot of it is, from the promoter's perspective, grossly unreasonable. And like, for example, you have should guarantee for some person who has probably been a friend. He is defaulted, and nobody has made a claim on you, but you still appear in the list as a guarantor. So these kind of things come in the way of your being considered on a priority, on a scale of whatever, when it comes to assessing your eligibility for it. Another thing which one will look at is the so that closes the credit rating chapter. Now we look at the ownership. Okay. Most bankers would prefer that one single person or group holds a reasonable majority of the shares. Multiple or very distributed ownership, multiple fellows, nobody knows who's going to be pulling what at what point in time. If funding is required, generally expected that everybody will contribute in proportion to their shareholding, but the minority shareholders generally don't contribute. So the banker's preference is always for concentrated ownership, preferably one or two, and who should be holding majority. So you also look at the management team. Many times you have owners which are quite different from the day-to-day management. The owners are only people who put money and call the shots, whereas the management team is the one which does the planning, execution, operation. So you must also have the management team which is reasonably experienced, qualified, and hands-on on the both the project aspects, product, market, project, the execution part of it, the operations of the project, which means the composition has to be balanced. You must have people who will lead the team. There are at the second level, you must have a set of managers who will follow the leaders. Each of them will have to have their qualifications and experience to put some degree of confidence in the bankers that this set of management team with this set of owners and this set of promoters in this entity is worth taking a risk on. I then come to the product and industry. Now, industry projects can be from any industry. The names are just innumerable, right from chemicals, pharma, textiles, engineering, metals, processing, your packaging, your food, your construction, you name it, and it's there. You also have to look at each industry has its own nuances in terms of each industry has a cycle. So some industries get priorities at some points in time. Some industries are considered to be in the downward trend. So bankers generally rank the downtrend industries low and the uptrend industries high. So this also is another major score and carries a lot of weight in the credit assessment. You also have to look at whether the products are controlled, regulated. Like pharma, you will have umpteen number of regulations to be complied with. Whether manufactured, whether products are banned. If you have something like alcohol, it's highly regulated. It needs to be licensed. The inputs are controlled. It's a pharma, the prices are regulated, and so on and so forth. So items which have no controls, no major regulations, no price controls tend to get better scores. Whereas ones which have these kind of controls and regulations, you will tend to, the bankers will tend to put them slightly on the lower scores. Within that industry, in each industry, there are of course hundreds and thousands of products. So you'll basically need to identify one or a set of products which you will take up for manufacture under the project. And when you talk of a product, you'll also have to define the size, specs. It can, like if you're saying, let's say castings, for example. Now you can have castings from 10 grams to 100 kgs. So you'll need to decide what kind of sizes and what kind of specs you will be addressing under the project. You'll also have to see whether the product is an industrial product or a consumer product. Basically, whether you are in the B2B class or you're in the B2C class. If you are in the B2B class, the kind of assessment that's done is slightly different from what is being done in the B2C class. The kind of focus areas that the bankers will have for assessing a B2C kind of product will be different from a B2B kind of product. You then come to the technology. There are, and of course, the manufacturing process. Technologies are high tech, low tech, and low tech. High techs are the ones which require specific know-how. It has to be either developed in-house or you must have procured it from somebody with licensing arrangement by paying proper fees. And the fellow should have legitimate ownership to that technology. It should not be something pirated which can land into trouble later on. You will also look at whether the technology is entirely new. It's a total innovation, not heard of earlier. There, the bankers, see, most bankers, despite all their claims, I hope there are no bankers in the audience. No offense meant to them. Bankers are generally averse to things which are new, which have not been tested, which have not seen the ups and downs of how life is going to treat you. So anything which is reasonably established will tend to get acceptance quickly. Anything new will require effort. You'll need to persuade, you'll need to convince, you'll need to support whatever claims that you're making. Technology, of course, you will also look at what kind of know-how is available, whether it's been tested. If you are going to be the first scapegoat, generally bankers will be reluctant to first-time users of technology. The kind of scrutiny that goes into first-time users or new users will generally be higher than what is required in case of standard established kind of know-how availability. Whatever arrangement that you have with the know-how provider, it can be self, it can be somebody known to you, or you have bought it out commercially. Apart from the know-how, what is examined or looked into is the entity and the institution's capability to absorb technology. Okay. You have bought the technology. You have been given some package which has been explained, with some handholding has been done. At some point in time, going down the line, you find that things are not working out the way the results are not what they should have been. You'll have no clue as to what has happened unless you absorb the hows, whys, and whats of the technology thoroughly. What if something goes this way or something goes down? The environment changes, the raw material composition changes. The process parameters are not as per standard. That impurity is creeping in. The yields drop off dramatically. Or in case of bioproducts, you will absolutely not know what's going on. So basically, you will necessarily have to have some capability within your organization, or you must at least have one standby arrangement who can be a consultant who is at your beck and call for addressing the technology issues or problems arising out of technology, so that whatever problems you come across are addressed appropriately and satisfactorily. So this aspect of it, some bankers, not many, are See, you must also have capability to do this assessment. Not many bankers have that, but generally one would want to look at this kind of a capability. Okay. So having done the product part, you look at what is the market scenario. Okay. Now, depending upon whether your product is in the national, regional, local, you'll need to do work in terms of assessing. You'll also want to be looking at what is the size of the project that you want to look at. If you want to be international, of course, the assessments will have a different nature. If you want, as you come down and address only local markets, the assessments will be easier and simpler to make up. Okay. The markets are again, they are regular 365 days a year. There are some products which have very seasonal demands. Some products are contingent event driven, something arising out of something like a Mahakam. You want to drive on events like this, or events which happen once in a while. Or you have your derived demand, basically your ancillary to somebody, or you have your supplier to your vendor to a larger manufacturer. So depending upon the fortunes and assessment of the main customer, your you will your assessment of your capability to look at the or address the market will be done. Okay. You also look at the demand supply scenario, past, current, and of course going forward in terms of growth rates. You will also want to look at who are your customers, who are your buyers, who is the competition, what are the entry barriers, what are the price trends, what are the gaps in supplies, and for what reasons, for availability of material, for availability of or ability to make quality products at a price. This aspect of it is looked at very, very carefully. So market is another major factor which the credit rating fellows will look at from the perspective of credit rating. Once having identified the gaps, and you will have to decide in terms of what kind of marketing strategies you will adopt, whether you will outprice, outsupply, better quality, better price, existing fellows, or if there's a gap in between, you will just try and fill that gap without significantly denting or affecting the existing players. You'll also have to create a, depending upon your strategy, your marketing infrastructure. If it is B2C, you have to create your distribution network, your dealer network, your product promotion policy or advertising policy. If it is B2C, you need to address who the buyers are. If it is just one, you will have to make sure that you enter into some kind of contract so that your products get manufactured and sold as you make them. So all these marketing arrangements will also have to be looked at. There are also we have business cycles, as I said. Some industries are going up and down. Some are going up, some are going down. Some have long gestation periods, like your business cycle from the time you procure an order to the time you recover the money. The cycle is long. There are some where you buy today, you buy yesterday, make today, sell tomorrow, collect day after. So anything which is small business cycle will require a shorter amount of working capital. Anything with a long business cycle and long payment terms will require large working capital, and therefore larger working capital margin, and therefore larger funding from everyone. So having looked at what the product is, what the market is like, you zero in on what kind of capacity you should be looking at. Okay. Now, it's what you, this is what is called an annual install capacity. Install capacity is the fulcrum around which project assessment revolves. Okay. It's a maximum theoretical number of units the product can, of the product that a project scheme can produce in a year. It's determined by the constraining capacity, constrained manufacturing unit in the scheme. Like if you have, let's say, castings unit. So your melting furnace will probably be the capacity of the melting will determine the capacity. Or in case of, let's say, a pharma product, if you're making, let's say, soft gel units, then your soft gel compression, the formulating encapsulation unit will be the capacity constraint. In case of engineering units, the largest machine which requires the largest process time and the largest machining will probably decide the number of units that you end up with. So basically, everybody should know what your capacity is about. The bankers will presume that you will not be able to make you'll not be able to produce beyond your installed capacity given a reasonable situation. Okay. And this capacity is based on either a single shift or triple shifts, or in case of a continuous project, 3-shift working. So 8 hours is 1 shift, 24 hours a day is 3 shifts, and continuous processes 24 hours a day. In case of non-continuous process units, the working is considered normally at 25 days a month, 300 working days in a year. In case of continuous process, the unit is expected to work about 330 days or approximately 8,000 hours in a year, and balance 35 days. It's expected that there'll be some minor shutdowns, or you take a major shutdown for a maintenance, annual maintenance. So this basically determines the max. When this is compared with when this is read together with the price per unit or the selling price per unit of output, you will get the maximum revenue potential of the project. So this eventually will get compared with this together with the gross margin will get compared with the investment that you are required to make for reaching this capacity. So a lot of fellows who are familiar with specific products will generally make out that the investment per unit of output is, let's say, X. Somebody will primarily say that your standard capacity size is X, your and the standard accepted investment per unit of output is Y, yours is Z. So you'll get a negative right at the beginning, so without going into much of it. So let's get into all this. In this capacity, you need to look at basically the location part of it. You have you must give the rationale for your choice of whatever region, state, district, location. It must primarily be a disaster risk-free zone. It must have ideally proximity to raw materials and market. It must preferably have reasonably advanced industrial infrastructure. Land availability is there. You must adequacy of land availability. There should be enough land for current use. There should be enough available for reasonable expansion future. There will be proper road infrastructure. You must have manpower, which is cooperative skill. There are facilities for training of workmen. There are sustained supplies of power, water in quantities, qualities. You have reliable and vendors who are known for their quality. You also make choices of locations depending upon how friendly is the state and local government in terms of policies and practices. Some industries are not considered to be industry friendly. If you ask me to go to Bihar, unless it's a raw material and mineral based kind of project, I would rather stick to a better state like maybe Maharashtra, Gujarat, AP, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, something like that. Government incentives are another driver for choice of locations. Depending upon over a period of time, most incentives offered by most states are equal, but at points in time, some industries, because of the focus that this state has on in terms of employment or in terms of attracting particular type of industries for their general revenue boosting efforts, these do count significant. These days, you don't get any of the incentives upfront. Most incentives are back-ended. So anybody who's looking at incentives, please bear in mind that all government incentives will come now after the project is implemented. The location should have ease of access in terms of air for promoters and senior management. There should be proper availability of quality housing, education, shopping, recreation, proximity for the both the senior management and the working population. Okay. Now, you come very quickly. I think we're running out of time. I'll very quickly run you through what the project scheme is, should be. There is a capital cost and there is a working capital. Now, capital cost will involve land, site development, civil construction, plant and machinery, utilities, other fixed assets, the operative expenses, and the provision for contingencies. It will also have to revolve around the manufacturing process and the inputs for operations. You should also make sure that you add a proper flow diagram of the manufacturing process with material balance, which will give absolute clarity on how the scheme is going to work. Now, in land, you have the land area, you have the shape of the plot. You must also look at the frontage part of it, what kind of access you have. The location, most people generally prefer industrial estates developed by either the state or some private agency. Private land, generally the lenders don't look kindly upon, in the sense that the ownership title are always, there can always be issues going forward. So somebody who offers you a clean title with properly laid out plots, with proper frontage, with good neighbors are preferred lands, and although the prices may be slightly higher, it's worth the effort. You must also do a contour survey of the plot, which will decide whether the site requires leveling or fully, partially to make use of the gradient. You must also do soil testing to make sure that the type of soil that you have in the plot is good enough for taking loads of the building and the machinery that is. If you are intending to install heavy machinery, heavy buildings, then the load bearing capacity of the soil has to be good. This aspect needs to be captured in the, you will also have, you have to prevent encroachment, you have to guard your fortress, you have to build a compound wall or fencing. You must have an entry controlled, access controlled entry gates, 1, 2, depending upon your convenience. Okay. All these has to be reduced eventually into a master plan. Okay. Before you start off with the project and have made the preliminary assessments, you must plan the site in terms of available land, how best you should do it, where you should have the internal roads, your production areas, what should be, how will the material, where are the materials, utilities, storage, where will the receipt points be, how will it be stored, what are the distribution corridors, there should be proper man material movement passages. You must have adequate workers amenities. You will have an open block. You will have open areas. You must also have, according to the new set of rules, green areas. You must also leave space for expansion. Your open areas and green areas ideally should be at least about 15% of the area. When it comes to expansion, you generally consider that you must be able to, in one place, you must be able to take up at least 100% expansion of your present capacity. In civil construction, there are broadly two types of construction. One is the covered areas, and second is the open areas. In covered areas, you have starting from the security cabin at the gate. You have, as the material comes in, you have stores for raw materials, store for consumables, you have production areas, you have QC areas, stores, finished goods, utilities, space for receipt, storage, distribution of power, water, compressed air, depending upon your requirement, whether it is a boiler house, whether you need STP, you need ETP, you necessarily requires amenities, you'll also need an admin block. In small areas, depending upon the type of the project and the size, each of these may be small, big, relatively compared to each other. Then you have the internal open areas, which do require construction in terms of you have internal roads, your drainage systems, your parking areas for workers, staff, guests. You also have green areas. Green areas basically will be gardens, so you'll have either trees, plantations, and things like that, which you necessarily use for disposing of your wastewater, treated wastewater. People look at fellows who have zero discharge as ideal situations. Internal roads will be, depending upon what kind of traffic you have in terms of incomings and outgoings. If you have 40 feet containers coming in and going, you need wider roads, wider turnings, parallel passing. You'll need, depending upon the kind of area you are in, depending upon the precipitation, you'll need to provide for stormwater drainage and all this rest of it. When you estimate the cost of the civil construction, you basically have to first decide your design philosophy, whether you will stack, that is go vertical, which is multi-story, or you'll grow horizontally, single story. Then you'll also have a choice of type of construction. You'll have plinth of whatever that you do in terms of foundation that you do, and RCC columns and RCC slabs, and the roofs or slabs. Or you can have pre-engineered buildings where you do the civil works up to the plinth level. You do the foundations and bring in pre-engineered buildings, structures, pre-ordered, pre-designed, pre-manufactured elsewhere to be brought in and assembled here. These are, because of the cost of construction is low, the construction is fast. These pre-engineered buildings are the order of the day, including in multi-story buildings. All these, the lender will want you to be supporting with the architect's detailed estimate of quantity and cost. He'll have to, for each of the buildings, we'll have to spell out area, height, quantity, and costs of each building through a detailed estimate, which normally the architect will provide. You'll also have to provide for architect's fees. You'll have to provide for supervision during construction, where if you're giving out contracts to outsiders in terms of construction, we'll have to define the contractor scope and the contract values. What all is, some of these can be on free issue basis like cement and steel. Others can be brought in by the contractor. Same thing goes in case of plant and machinery. You must basically have comprehensive list of machinery in line with your manufacturing processes and the capacities that you plan. If the manufacturing involves, let's say, 5 stages, each of these processes, which set of machines will perform those and for what period. These need to be identified. The capacity of the machine needs to be identified, the specs, whatever. So you will basically give a table which will comprise of the description of machinery, equipment, whatever dies, tooling, fixtures, whatever is required. Who is the manufacturer? What is the model number? What capacity the machine has in terms of both design capacity and operating capacity. Some are designed to, in case of exceptional cases, they can go up to their design capacity, whereas normal operating capacity is significantly lower. What kind of power consumption do they have? So you will have to assess the power rating there and consumption of utilities also. You will have the rate of the price of the machine, the quantity, and therefore costs. You'll also have to include critical spares, which also have to be part of the cost of the project. You'll see most of these prices are ex-factory, so you'll have to add the transport and insurance costs from the manufacturers, from the vendors' factory to your site. Then you'll also have to add the after the thing reaches there, you'll have to add erection costs, you'll have to, and the commissioning costs. The basis of cost has to be valid quotation with delivery period and terms of payment. This can't be guesstimates. At least in case of all critical machinery, you must necessarily have valid quotations. Without that, your estimates of cost will have no meaning and no basis. Same goes for the utilities, which is basically power, water, and others like our requirement is in terms of kVA. You will require some load during construction, and for regular operations, you will need a normal operate proper sanction from the DISCOM. You will want to have, they will ask you for what is going to be connected load, what is going to be a demand, depending upon your capacity utilization. You will have to define what these are going to be. Some of it you can generate on your own if you put a generator, or if you have some solar arrangement, or most of it will necessarily be on the grid. Okay. Power will get used for process. You will have for heating applications, you will have cooling applications, you will have lighting, and the power will come at some kVA. Like you'll have the power station, the DISCOM is giving you power from a 66 kVA substation at 3 kilometers away. So you'll have to bring it from 66, bring it down to your site, put a transformer for reducing it to 66 to 440 or 66 to 11 and then 440. All these are costs. So anybody who's assessing this, it will have cost implications. You'll also want your backup and emergency power. Most powers provided by grid normally have 1 week off for line maintenance. You will need to make arrangements for power, or you have to coincide your weekly power, weekly holiday with that power shutdown time. Same goes for water. You will have construction water, you will have regular operation water. Same goes in terms of you'll have requirement of process water, you'll have domestic use in terms of drinking, washing, cleaning, your cooling tower requirement. It can be bore well, it can be external supplies, it can be tanker, it can come through pipelines from a municipal source. You'll also have to look at the water quality if your product is sensitive to water quality. It will also require water treatment if it is sensitive in terms of filtration or demineralization, whatever. You will have to have water storage in terms of raw water, in terms of
Excuse me,
people,
just
supplier
if I
water.
can, yeah, if I can just interrupt a little bit.
Yeah,
Perhaps in the interest of time, we
yeah.
can go to the financial part that might be more interesting. Yeah, if you can run us through a little bit of how
Okay, okay, okay,
financials are done, right? That will
okay,
be helpful.
okay. I'll very quickly run you through. We have covered power, water, others in terms of boiler, compressed air, वगैरह वगैरह, ETP, STP, gaseous, solid, whatever.
Yeah,
You
we can keep going ahead. We can probably,
you also have other
this will,
requirements which eventually translate into you translate into a project cost matrix, which will give you basically what is the kind of money that you require for setting up the project and the means of finance for it in terms of own funds, equity capital, quasi capital, whatever. The promoters are required to arrange for the own funds. The debt from external sources will come necessarily from banks in the form of term loan. You will also have to run through the implementation schedule. You will also have to have licenses, registrations, consents, approvals. You will have to highlight the status of all those. You will also have to run through a process flow diagram. Okay. You will also look at the materials cost, manpower costs, utilities costs, wherever. Now you come to the financial model. Okay. This what you when you say you assess the performance, you basically have to project your performance during the implementation stage and the project life till repayment, which is 5 to 7 years. These are basically given in 3 sheets, which is profit and loss statement, the balance sheets, and the cash flows. And along with this, you necessarily have to give in as much detail as possible the assumptions. Okay. The profitability estimates are to be given on the basis of set of assumptions. The cash flows have to reflect the profitability, balance sheets have to reflect the closing position, performance should reflect adequate cash generation surplus year on year, surplus the obligations of the bank to establish financial liability. Now, when you look at these, what will one look at? What will the bank look at? When it comes to financing, they will look at the debt equity ratio, which should preferably be not more than 2:1, in exceptional cases going up to 3:1. The tangible assets coverage ratio, most bankers are comfortable with physical assets and not intangible. So tangible assets coverage, they would prefer to be around at least 1 times, but closer to 1.25 times. The promoter's contribution of the project has to be 20 to 25% at least. The current ratios has to be about 1.5. Liquid ratio is of some level. Break-even levels are also assessed. The other viability ratios which the banker will look at is the debt service coverage ratio, which is basically a comparison between the cash surplus that you generate before interest with the obligation that you have for servicing the interest and the repayment. So the cash surplus to obligations ratio has to be not less than average over the life of the period, over the life of the project, not less than 2:1. Anything lower than that will mean they will have to increase the repayment period. Anything less than that will mean possibly that they will curtail the loan period. Your internal rate of return has to be higher than the weighted average cost of capital, which is a mix of capital and debt. Your payback period ideally should be not more than 5 years. In case of infrastructure projects or high investment projects, the payback period can be longer. They'll also look at the sensitivity in terms of if something goes wrong in terms of in compared to the projections, your selling price or the gross margin is lower or higher. If it's higher, no worries. If it's lower, to what extent will it have effect on the break-even and the debt service coverage? This aspect of it, most bankers will necessarily look at. If all these stand true, you stand against these ratios, are fine with it. I'll before I say thank you or any questions, I'll run you very quickly through a set of financial models which can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a very brief kind of project where we had assessed uh, the a project during COVID, at the beginning of COVID, or just as COVID had flared, for making what they called M95 masks, where you have you bring in a machine, primarily from China, which has a capability to run round the clock and produce as long as you're able to provide the material required. It will start throwing out. So there is hardly any technology involved, as long as you are reasonably trained, reasonably intelligent operator, you'll keep on producing whatever you want, whatever quantities that you want. So for a specific capacity, we are looking at buildings in terms of production area, your storage area, your testing office, total area. There you give length and breadth, whatever. All these assumptions are very simply defined, where the spaces in yellow are the ones which you can change, the others are formalized. Okay. The whole project revolves around a fully automatic N25 mask making machine line, okay, which comes for a value. With freight insurance, it adds up to something. Landed cost is something. The local equipment that's required adds up to something else. So you require some electrical support. You require some furniture. You require some miscellaneous activity. Total value of the project is about 5 crores order of magnitude. If you have your own premises, if you use rented premises, you can do with the investment in the building. You can just be from capital cost, it becomes a revenue cost because you're only paying rent. That cost comes to about 1 crore 90 lakhs. Let's say order of magnitude about 2 crores. Okay. You look at the material costs. It's a multi-layer product, which is the mask body. Some are 6 layers, some are 6 layers, 6 ply. So for each of these, you have what the size of the component, the description of the component, the material required, weight, rate, and therefore cost. Same goes for the other type. You'll require some accessories in terms of an ear loop. That is also costed. You have a chin support strip, you have a foam support strip, whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 add up to about 290, which is cost per unit. These are rupees in lakhs. Therefore, this works out to 2.9 rupees per unit. Total cost for 6 layer works out to about 4.186. For a 3-layer thing, adds up to about 3.56. You also have to add packing material, which adds up another 40%. Okay. Now, you will look at very briefly, okay, your production capacity in terms of units per minute, therefore units per day, therefore units per year, whatever. So you can make so many. This is your capacity. If you operate it at about 80%, which should be, it is a no-brainer, you will end up making these quantities. Okay. This is the product mix: 50% one product, 50% second product. Revenue in terms of selling price per unit is, that time when we looked at it, 15 rupees looked quite doable. For 3 years, 12 rupees looked doable. So over a period of time, we had thought the price will come down. They came down much faster, but there was some estimate of pricing, okay, which gave you some sales revenue. Compared to that, you have your raw material costs, your packing material cost per unit, your operator costs in terms of the grades that you have, where you'll require them, you'll whatever. In terms of they add up to a cost of about some rupees per month, 4.5 lakhs per month. You will similarly require power, which is costed at 10,000 rupees, 10 rupees per unit, costs about 8,000 rupees. You'll require maintenance, you'll require selling, marketing expense, whatever. All these costs add up to, you'll also require some working capital, which is equivalent of raw material, packing material, finished goods, receivables, whatever. All these translate into, which adds up to another some number over that 5 crore initial period. Your sales revenue is about 15 crores in first year itself. At 80% utilization, because this is a no-brainer technology product where everything comes with the machine. You just have to flog the machine and take production out. Okay? Where the expenditure of this order, your costs are against a 15 crore kind of cost, you'll have about a 7 crore kind of cost, you'll have PBT of about 8 crores. Your project cost is 5 crores, your PBT is 8 crores. You will have payback within 1 year. So the same principle, I mean, this is a very simplistic model of a very simple, what did I say? Simple project where anybody with a set of notes in his pocket and ability to take risks, rush into setting up the facility and encashing on the opportunity before others realize how big the opportunity was. These are the kind of projects that this model stands for. Okay. I'll look at one more, which is a lot more complicated. It's a food park in a state in the Northeast, where you have very absolute details, assumptions about project cost, about operations, materials, everything down the line. Since we're running out of time, I'll very quickly run you through this. You have the capacities, you have the means of finance, you have the working capital, you have the revenue model in terms of selling of plots on one-time basis, you have recurring incomes, you have storage rentals, you have processing charges. It's basically a food park which the developer is supposed to have developed under Ministry of Food Processing Industries, mega food parks project, where the subsidy was to the extent of 50 crores per project, where the project cost was expected to be 100 crore plus. So this gives you a fairly, since there is no time, I'll just run you through the stages in terms of what the project components are, which we had discussed earlier in terms of land, site development, roads, drainage, sewerage, your water supply systems, your electricals, your common facilities, buildings, you have processing facilities, your storage facilities, you have whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, your manufacturing equipment, your supporting equipment. It also had, the project had, it was a hub and spoke kind of model where the central processing center was at the hub, and there are what is called as processing centers in the vicinity, which in turn were serviced by collection centers again across the state. So it was a combination of one central hub supported by about 6 processing centers and about 24 collection centers. Okay. Each of these have been like what these components, requirements for CPC in terms of land building machinery for PPC, and so on have been defined here and detailed. Okay. The marks in yellow are the inputs and assumptions. Rest are all formulas which do the calculations. Okay, then that brings you to the project cost and similarly what we had looked at in terms of, these are all derived numbers here from those earlier worksheets. You have land development, building, whatever, adding up to a total number of about 135 crores. Then there is a grant from the government, which the government gives pro rata to equity, and loan from, contribution from the promoters and term loan from IFCI. Then you come to the revenue part of it. Similarly, this is basically the P&L. This is the basis for the revenue. Okay. In terms of what will be sold at what point in time and what rates. Similarly, you have the expenses in terms of manpower, in terms of power, in terms of whatever we have talked about. Okay. There's a schedule of expenses, which again translates into which is carried to the profit and loss account. You have the term loan, how the term loan is going to be at what rate, over what period, what installments, what moratorium. Moratorium is basically the holiday that the term lender gives you for you to be able to reach the commercial production stage. If the first draw is on, let's say, 3 months down after a financial closure, but the project completion takes 1 year, he'll give you 9 plus about 3 months, about 1 year's moratorium. So you are expected to pay out of the generations and not out of the capital contributions. So this becomes very critical. The moratorium period becomes very critical for first timers who have no experience of project setting. Invariably, your estimates go wrong in terms of costs, in terms of time schedules. You have drawn the money, you don't know where the balance is going to come from, and the meter is ticking. Although although interest during construction is supposed to be pre-operative and supposed to be funded by the bank, banks invariably insist on you're paying that so that the account doesn't become NPA. Then you also have the depreciation calculation. Let's not go into that. The taxation calculations, the profit and loss statement. This is a broadly standard profit and loss statement. All these are drawn from the previous workings, which should show that you have some operating profit each year before interest. There is a surplus before tax, there's a tax element, and there's a profit after tax. If you have a lot of money, you're free to distribute that by dividends. Otherwise, the bankers will have first charge on all the profits and surplus that you generate. Then comes the cash flow part. You have the inflows, you have the outflows or utilizations. During construction, you have share capital and money is coming from these identified sources, applications of the project cost and the means of finance. From year one, you will have your profit before interest, depreciation, tax, which is drawn from the P&L statement, and then utilized basically for working capital and for payment of interest and taxes. So you will have some balances at the beginning of the year. There will be surplus after payments of your obligations. You'll have some closing balance which gets carried forward, and so on and so forth. This gets translated into the liabilities and asset position in the form of liabilities and assets. So you come down to, we had talked about the debt service coverage ratio. So you basically compute the debt service coverage ratio in terms of net profit after tax, and you add back the interest on term loan and depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. So you have a surplus of about 598 lakhs. Against that, your interest on term loan is about 271 lakhs. You have no installment of term loan because there is a moratorium period. So you'll end up paying only this much. Therefore, your ratio for that year is 2.2. Next year, you have interest obligation and the repayment obligation. So for the year, your average goes down. Similarly, depending upon what kind of surplus that you generate, your average will go down, and the cumulative average they will look at, and it should ideally be closer to 2. But in case of infrastructure projects like these, they either give they accept lower debt service coverage ratio, or they will look at extending the repayment period, so that you get average of whatever that you think is appropriate. Your IRR and payback, I'm sure most fellows are familiar with the calculations. So we have some net cash flows over a period of time and discount it at the cost of capital. So IRR is this. Your payback is depending upon which year you are generating how much. Your payback in this case is about 6 years. This is the story of what you should. I mean, all these these are all assumptions. You can keep tweaking them to reach an acceptable level as long as you're able to justify the tweaking and the assumption levels.
For this case, can you just show us what is the final loan that was sought? What was the terms
For
this case that you're talking about here? What is the final loan terms? How much was sought? What is the
in this case,
Yeah.
you look at the means of finance, isn't it? Term loan. Basically, term loan is value is 50 crores. At then 14 point at interest rate was 14.5 that point in time. This is about long years ago. Number of installment is 5. Installments in the year is 12. Moratorium is 12 months.
Okay. And any ratios here that you want to show?
You have debt equity is 50, and on the all these together are considered is less than 1. So debt is 50, equity including grant is 87. So you're significantly lower than 1.
Okay, great.
Your DSCR is of the order about cumulative is about 1.56, maximum is about 2.2, minimum is about 1.24. Average they say was 1.4 times. IRR was in this case payback was 6 years, as I said, and because these are all high investment and low revenue kind of projects, the government came up with what one considers a viability gap funding in the form of a grant, which was 50 crores. Even today, 50 crore for a mega food park project continues to be a record in terms of any government scheme where the government has given for one single unit subsidy, not back-ended, front-ended, of this magnitude. Over a period of time, these things have diluted, and viability gap happen only in case of very critical and essential, socially justifiable infrastructure projects.
Okay. Are you done with your presentation?
Yeah. Got it.
Okay, great.
If anybody
First of
has
all,
questions, I'll be happy to answer.
thank you very much. We will have a few questions.
I am sorry that I could not do justice to what this whole subject
No.
of nature. It is.
We realized that this deserves a full workshop, I think, because it has a lot of content and also a lot of learning for many of us. But it's a good introduction. It gives you a glimpse of whatever at least there should be some awareness of what is to be expected in such program, in such a DPR, right? Okay, there
Yeah.
were some
Should I
questions.
stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
Okay. Yeah.
Just before we take up some questions, 1 or 2 maybe.
Yeah, please. I mean, I'm free for any.
The feedback for everyone is there in the chat box, and we
Yeah.
will be meeting for the next talk on 11th of March for the talk on only how venture studios work. So yeah, over to you, Dr. Premnath, for the questions.
Yeah, so let me just take up a few questions from the chat box. One from Ashish Orpe, which says, what is typically preferred by banks, asset heavy or asset light businesses, availability of assets offered as collateral with not so great business prospects, or business with superior business prospects, even if no collateral is offered.
See, unfortunately, the banking system is not what the government wants it to be, at least formally. Most bankers would prefer to be cover their exposure by tangible assets. The project invariably will not offer the kind of cover that they seek. So most bankers would want collateral which has got no correlation with the project. So promoters, private properties, or promoters, other assets are necessarily insisted upon the bankers if one has to. Some bankers are open. Of course, the government has been saying for MSMEs, no collateral-free loans up to 1 crore. That limit is being increased to 5 crores. But so far, I have not come across. These are more of exceptions to the rule than bankers will invariably ask for collateral, specifically for first time.
And I think most of these are sort of capital heavy kind of, which will be
No, not really. Even if low
not
capital
really.
projects also, see, you must appreciate the bankers' mentality. Okay? They have been through thick and thin, and most times they have. I shouldn't be saying worked in good faith. They have not done their assessments thoroughly, and as a consequence, see, earlier there was a system of the institutions doing projects, banks doing working capital. The assessment of project costs was specialized. That skill was available. Today, you have bankers doing right from selling of cross-selling of products to deposit mobilization to everything under the sun. So there is a fair lack of or inadequacy of expertise for assessing projects and their paid within promoters. So generally, people have burned their fingers. Everybody has had loads of NPAs which they have passed on to ARCs. So I mean, that is one way of getting rid of your cleaning your books. But you don't have. You must accept that you don't have the kind of expertise that you should for doing project funding. So everybody plays cautious, and you also have this vigilance sword hanging over everybody. So why would anybody want to stretch his neck to do this?
So in
generally, benefit of doubt tends to be
yeah.
given in exceptional cases. Also.
I think in most cases they would go for very strong collateral, but in TDB kind of things, which is like technology development boards loans,
yeah,
I think they do look to have a lot more capital assets in the project than the work, than it just being merely operational costs of working capital.
You have all kinds of funds. I mean, how many have access to that? They get given only to a few.
Yeah,
they're not available across the board. If I want, I'm sure in your own incubation population that you have developed, there are, as I was reading numbers, 750 fellows who are qualified. How many have got funding from TDP?
No, you're right. TDP still loan is
not
or
something equivalent.
Common. Yeah. Typically, loans are not the preferred vehicle for startups because there's considerable risk involved, and bankers are not necessarily taking as much risk, right? They want to protect their investment. It's not they're not participating in risk like venture capital investors and angel investors.
See, there are agencies, specialized agencies for each of these, but their reach is all said and done limited. Of course, things have been, the situation is far, far better than what it used to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Today, at least you can think of a startup with somebody with no capital. There are people, private entrepreneur, there are angel investors, you have the whole lot.
Yeah. So there's another question from Mr. Bose here saying, do bankers use tools for screening and scoring product class, example controls, or is it done manually?
There are tools available. See, bankers look at it that way, and their experience and knowledge is profound. Only thing is, it's not available readily across the organization in the bank. So like there are millions of applications with each bank each year. That data itself should give you, you put some AI program on that, you will have what product, what capacity, what values. That will be the benchmark.
Yeah.
But generally, the most fellows go by personal experience in terms of assessing, or there are, in case of more evolved organizations like the ICICI Bank, the assessments are system driven, where the person sitting behind the counter is of no consequence. The delivery is irrespective of who's sitting behind the counter. The system does the assessment. So in case of, let's say, or home loans or things like this, you'd see that the sanctions come across in a matter of hours, not even days. Projects, unfortunately, has not reached that stage as yet.
Final question from my side is, does the presence of patents and intellectual property, etc., for the technology, does it make any difference to the project assessment?
In what way? Sorry?
In your project assessment, when you're looking at assessing the technologies and so on, or in terms of things like patents and so on and so forth, does it help in any way? Because it's also an asset, right? It's an intellectual property.
See, the bankers, for the banker, technology is technology. It is most bankers don't even understand what the thing is about, without meaning any offense. There are very few fellows who understand what the whole thing is. They all understand it's a black box, and if you use that, probably you'll IP. From the banker's perspective, what value is a matter of perception. You can build in whatever value you want, as long as they don't seem too stretched or too exaggerated. In terms of utilization of IP or risk of technology leaking through banks, hardly any chance.
Yeah, no, I just meant in terms of that helping in the case.
See, even look at the kind of protection that you have for patents today. We all talk about IP. What kind of protection you have? There are hundreds of fellows copying rampantly.
Yeah, but it is a tradable asset, right?
It is a tradable asset, yes.
Yeah,
its value is in the eyes of the beholder.
Yeah.
Its value is a matter of perception. If you're able to persuade the investor to see value in your proposition, if he's a financial investor, he'll see some value in terms of return. If he's a strategic investor, he'll see a totally different value.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, your ability to convert your tech into dollars or rupees, whatever you call it, that's what will, or his perception of your ability to convert is what will matter in terms of in these kind of situations.
Yeah. Finally, I just wanted to ask, in your simulations, for example, you will see that you have to get to cash fairly quickly, right? There are some industries where regulations are there and so on and so forth. getting to revenue is a little slower process. What happens in those cases? Say a biotech company or a pharma company. What do you do do those companies attract any loan kind of financing at all?
See, biotech is something which nobody understands.
Hmm.
It's all those who claim they understand biotech. With due respect, I would like to discount their claims significantly. Um, there was a company in Nasik
Hmm.
which made amino acids from chicken feathers.
Hmm.
It was set up by a very well-known promoter, owner of a very well-known brand and company. I don't want to get into names,
Hmm.
but a lot of people jumped at it without realizing that it's biotech. What you do in lab, what you do in pilot, and the scale up, commercial scale up are absolutely different. They are all fellows
There's
sitting
considerable
there
technology
operating.
risk.
Huh?
There's considerable technology risk, basically uncertainty about
Absolutely,
technology.
absolutely.
So usually,
You may
probably
be
not.
able to prove some yields and prices, quality, quantity at some level of operation. The moment you scale up, unless tested, there's a huge risk, huge risk. Everybody burned money. Everybody burned their fingers. And except for the land and building, nothing was recoverable. All of it was. And over a period of time, what happens is buildings tend to deteriorate. What remains is value. What remains is only the land. So most fellows have survived because land has appreciated and you took it at some absurd prices. And now land prices zoomed up everywhere. So it's more than adequate to cover all your liabilities. I mean, that's a saving grace. Not because you planned it.
Mhm. Okay, great. So I think on that note, I think we will close. I really appreciate you taking time out to give us this
Oh,
introduction.
it's more than a pleasure. It's more than a
Yeah.
pleasure. I
And
would make this a open offer to anyone and everyone who's there in the audience. If anybody needs any help of any kind on doing anything like this, please feel free to call me at any time. I would be more than happy to help.
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahale. Thank you for
Pleasure,
this
pleasure.
full session.
My pleasure.
And look forward to having more such sessions with you in the future.
It's
To
my
the
pleasure and privilege.
Yeah, to the audience again, please give your feedback before you leave this session. And we will be hosting the next talk in this series on 11th of March at 4 p.m., which is again a Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.